The video you're about to watch was created to help survivors of sexual assault. The information that you'll find here will help you to make choices about what you want and need to do right now and in the future. We'll provide you with facts about sexual assault, about Canada's laws, and your rights as a victim of this crime. You'll hear from people you may encounter along the way, medical professionals, a victim services advocate, police officers, and a sexual assault counselor will tell you what their jobs are when they're helping someone who's been sexually assaulted. You'll also hear from Crown prosecutors, a defense lawyer, and a judge about what their jobs are in court, and they will talk to you about what the court process might look like. Two women who were sexually assaulted will tell you about their decision to report the crime, about their experiences with the court process, and about the things that help them most through the process of healing. As you watch the video, you will be able to choose the pieces of information you would like to see now and which segments you'd prefer to view later. You may also decide to return to certain chapters to watch them again, or you may choose to watch the entire video from start to finish. To begin, simply click on one of the menu buttons that will appear on the screen. After a sexual assault has happened, it's very important to be examined by a doctor or specially trained nurse for any injuries that may have been caused by the assault. It's also important that you get immediate medical treatment for possible sexually transmitted infections, and if you're a woman, potential pregnancy. Where you can receive this kind of medical service depends a lot on where you live. Some major cities have special sexual assault response teams of doctors or nurses for exactly this purpose. In many smaller communities, you will likely need to go to the emergency department of your local hospital, to your family doctor, or a walk-in clinic for an examination and medical treatment. In more remote communities, there may be nursing stations where you can be examined. If you're unsure about where to go, it's best to call your local victim services unit, police, or sexual assault service for this information. In some cases, one of their staff members may accompany you to where you need to go. It is your choice. The medical examination usually begins with a few questions about your medical history.
Once I've taken that brief medical history, then I'll ask them some questions about the sexual assault. And those can sometimes be difficult questions because they're embarrassed. But we try to make it as easy as we can for that process, because I need to understand what happened to their body when they were assaulted. Once I've taken their medical history, then I usually will spend some time talking to them about what are the things that can happen to them from being sexually assaulted, such as infections or pregnancy for women. We examine them from head to toe. It's a little bit of a different exam than what you would expect from just going to your doctor to have a regular physical, because I'm looking for subtle little injuries that might be there, that they might not even know they have. So I'm going to look at the front of their body, I'm going to look at the back of their body, and it's really important, I think, to try and keep them as covered up as possible while we're doing that, because it's a very vulnerable position to be in, and I need them to understand that they have control at any time that I'm doing this exam. They can stop me, they can tell me they don't want to go ahead, that's all fine. It's also important for us to know if there's injuries, because it helps me decide what I'm going to treat the patient with as far as medications. So once we've done all that, then we take swabs from the area, which are just like little Q-tips.
My role as a sexual assault nurse is to assist the physician when he's examining the patients to make sure that they're medically stable. I also am there to provide education to the patient on their choices, and to let them know what they will expect while they're being examined. I also do some follow-up to give patients their lab feedback and just to see if they have any concerns and make sure that they have been in contact with a crisis team.
The things that can happen when you have unprotected sex are sexually transmitted infections, and there are many of those. The other thing that can happen is pregnancy, unwanted pregnancy. The nice thing is that if we can see patients generally within 72 hours, we can prevent a lot of that. There are several sexually transmitted infections that can be treated easily by giving pills, just 5 pills. They take them all at once, and they're essentially pretty much guaranteed 99.9% of the time that they're not going to get those infections. There are a few infections that are transmitted sexually that I can't prevent, and I talk to the patients about that because it's important for them to understand that they need to look out for those kinds of symptoms of these diseases and just make sure that they get proper follow-up with their family doctor or a clinic, wherever they feel comfortable following up. When we see patients, generally as soon as we see them, we like to draw blood, and the reason for that is because we will obviously test for some sexually transmitted infections that show up in the blood, such as syphilis and HIV, hepatitis. But we also like to draw blood in case there's been a potential for a drug-facilitated sexual assault. The sooner we get that blood sample, the more likely we are going to catch that drug in their serum. We also do urine tests to make sure that there is no infection and to see whether we can find any drugs that may have been administered to them. And the other thing that we do when we're doing the pelvic exam or the genital exam is we'll take swabs to test for STDs. When a person's been sexually assaulted, they can choose to report the crime to the police, in which case the police may decide to collect evidence and the physician will help them collect that evidence. They can also choose not to report to police, and they'll still have the same physical exam, the same documentation of injuries. That stuff's really important in case they do change their mind and want to talk to police later, but they may not get evidence collection. In some areas of the province, we have a new system in place where you can actually have evidence collected by the examiner and it'll be stored. And you may not choose to report to police right away, but you have the option of reporting to police later. If you change your mind, then at least we have the evidence, we haven't lost it, and you can still report to police and have the benefit of the evidence collection.
The collection of evidence is time sensitive, so the sooner we collect the DNA, the better chance that the DNA can be analyzed and used at a later date. So there are some times when patients don't want to report to the police, and it's quite a difficult decision for them to make. If they decide that they do not want the police involved, then the biggest thing that we do encourage is that they do get checked out medically and that they do seek treatment and be treated for sexually transmitted diseases.
The evidence that we collect varies depending on every case, but probably the most important thing that we collect is clothing. Because what we're looking for is we're trying to find out if a sexual act happened, we're trying to find out who did it. And so we're looking for DNA. And DNA can be deposited on clothing because it's worn next to your body wherever that assault may have happened. So clothing can be very important. Generally, we always take the underwear if there is underwear, but sometimes we'll take all of the clothing that was being worn. The other thing that we'll do is we'll look for hairs or fibers that might suggest that they came from the site where the sexual assault happened. So if you're outside on a hay bale and we happen to find some hay in your hair, that might be really important. So we're looking for little fine things like that. We might be looking for evidence of skin or blood underneath the nails if a victim happened to scratch their assailant. I know it's difficult and what's happened to you is very difficult, but if we would like to try and save as much evidence on your body as we can. So it would be best if you could avoid having a shower or a bath, because every time you do that, we wash evidence away. If you don't have to go to the bathroom, it's better to try not to go to the bathroom, because again, every time you pass urine, you're washing evidence away. If you need to change your clothing, that's okay, but just bring your clothing with you so that we can have a look at it and decide whether or not we need to take it for evidence. Historically, there's a big myth around the physical exam after you've been sexually assaulted. Some people see it as a real invasion or an intrusive examination that's almost like another assault. I don't think it needs to be that way. I think if you can explain the procedure to the patient as you're going along, help them understand that by participating in the exam, they're ensuring that they have that their health is the best it can be, give them choices all along the way about which part of the exam they want or don't want. The examination process after a sexual assault can actually be pretty empowering for the victim instead of intrusive.
The patient has the right to stop the exam at any point. After a sexual assault, the patient sometimes feels like the control has been taken away from them, and they need to feel that that control is coming back. So we encourage them right from the beginning that if there's anything that they feel uncomfortable with, that they just ask us to stop and we will stop.
I do have to go to court in cases where a patient has decided to report to police and I've collected evidence and I've documented all the injuries. My role when I go to court would be to present my findings to a judge or a judge and a jury and help them understand what it is that I found and whether or not what I found is consistent with what they're hearing in the court as far as what happened during the assault. I don't think that the gender of the physician or the examiner should make a difference. It's more about how does that person approach you. It's so important when you're doing an examination for a sexual assault that the patient understands that you believe everything they say, that you're not judging anything they did, and that nothing was their fault. We do see men who have been sexually assaulted. I don't think we see enough of them. I think there's a lot more men who have been assaulted that aren't coming forward, and maybe there's more reasons why they don't present to us. But their health concerns are no different than a female's concerns are. They can get sexually transmitted infections just like women can. It's really important that the care that you get doesn't stop today. We will give you medications to prevent some sexually transmitted diseases in pregnancy today. What you need to do is follow up with someone that you're comfortable with, either your family doctor, someone in the community, an emergency department, whatever is available to you within the next several months to make sure that you haven't gotten any infections, to make sure that your mental health is okay, and to make sure that you have a chance to ask questions in case there's something that's come up for you that maybe we didn't address today.
Upon discharge, I like to give the patient community links and resources in our community. If there's one message that we would like the victim of a sexual assault to know, is that it was not their fault. They did not ask to be assaulted. It wasn't because of something that they wore or something that they said. Someone took that from them. They took the control from them. So we want to be here to help support them in their needs, have them treated medically, and the sooner that we can help them through that process, the sooner their healing process can begin. We are not here to judge you. We just want to be here to help you and provide the support and compassion that you deserve.
A person who has been sexually assaulted has choices about reporting the assault to police. People have many reasons for choosing to report or not to report. You are under no legal obligation to report this crime. In this section, you'll hear from two veteran police officers who have experience in investigating the crime of sexual assault. They will provide you with information that may help you to make a decision about reporting the crime. If you've already reported the sexual assault to police, this section will provide more information about the role of the police investigator and the investigative process. You will hear from a Crown prosecutor and learn about your rights and responsibilities during this stage.
Our role as police officers in a sexual assault investigation is to determine whether we have grounds to lay a charge. And in trying to determine that, we'll collect all the evidence. So it may be physical evidence, maybe statements, talking to victims, witnesses, talking to the offender. And when we do determine that there are grounds to lay a charge, we go forward and do that.
If someone is a danger to the public or to the victim, as well, if there's any concern that they will not show up in court, then we will oppose their release. We often call it bail and release. We're talking about the exact same thing. And often you'll hear bigger words, but in essence we're talking about whether they're going to be in custody or not. The victim should make sure that they let the police or Crown know what their safety concerns are so that we can address it when we do the bail hearing. We can put conditions in place even before they speak to bail, or if bail is denied, that they cannot have any contact with the victim. And if they do get released, we can put strict conditions on them, and some of those conditions include no contact with the victim or members of their family or children, and also to stop them from going near any places such as residence, school, places of work, any of those types of things as well. So we need that information from a victim as best as they can supply it and what their concerns are.
If a victim feels that their safety is in jeopardy after the offense, there are a few things we do to address that. The first one would be safety planning. So we'll do extensive safety planning with the victim, talk to them about the physical security around their home, where they work, where they frequent, even if they go to certain coffee shops, restaurants. We want to be changing that up in the event the offender knows where those places are. When we investigate a sexual assault, we're looking to gather all the evidence we can to corroborate the laying of a charge. Sometimes it's physical evidence, and in a more recent sexual assault, that may include a sexual assault examination. That may include gathering physical evidence, such as bed sheets, torn clothing, DNA samples, biological samples, things like that. But also it includes things like statements and talking to victims, talking to witnesses and offenders, getting their version of what happened and putting that all together to paint the picture to determine if we have grounds to lay a charge.
So the Crown looks objectively at what do we have? What's the relevant, credible evidence that we have that we'll be putting before a court? And we have to make a determination about whether or not there's a reasonable likelihood of conviction before we even get started. And if there isn't, it doesn't mean that the victim isn't believed, but if there isn't a reasonable likelihood of conviction based on the evidence that's available, the Crown has an obligation to not pursue a prosecution.
Initially, generally, the police and the Crown do not work on a case together. The police are in charge of the investigation, and the prosecutor generally would play no role in the investigation whatsoever. It's only if the police have some questions during an investigation, or if they have unsure if they have enough evidence to proceed, that they might consult a Crown prosecutor. The Crown prosecutor and police start to work more closely together once the charges are laid. At that time, the police have a responsibility to give the Crown their file, and the Crown reviews it to determine if they're going to proceed.
In terms of being updated by police throughout the investigation, it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So we will contact the victim when the offender is arrested. We will contact the victim to let them know about the court date. Now, in some areas, the police officer may phone and update the victim with every court appearance and what happened. In other areas, that's tasked out to the victim service units. So someone will be working with them to do court preparation and let them know what happened at each appearance.
If a charge has been laid, I generally start from the position that we will be proceeding, that there's enough evidence there to proceed. Certainly the police standard is somewhat lower than the Crown standard, but I look at it from that viewpoint at first, that we will proceed. There's all kinds of things that we look at whether or not we proceed. The type of evidence, if the investigation is complete, what type of statement we have from the victim, whether the victim is cooperative, whether the victim is recanting, how fearful that victim is, all of those things. Some of those things we can do something about, in particular a fearful victim. In other cases, we can't do anything. So it would be at that point I would advise the victim, introduce myself to them and let them know if we are proceeding and how we're going to proceed.
If a person is not charged with a criminal offense, it doesn't mean that the police don't believe the survivor. What it means is that after they've collected all the evidence, it just simply is not strong enough case to go to court. It doesn't mean we don't believe them. It just means the justice process is not the place that this is going to be resolved. And it's unfortunate, but it does happen. We have to keep in mind always that you have to convince a judge beyond a reasonable doubt. And if the evidence just is not there, if it's just not strong enough, it's not that it didn't happen, it just means that the case is just not strong enough to go to court.
There's many reasons why a prosecution may be terminated. Certainly if more evidence comes to light or evidence changes, as well if a victim chooses that they do not want to continue with the prosecution, that is something that the Crown Prosecutor must take into account. It would be very rare for a Crown Prosecutor to force a victim to testify, and in fact that is something that we generally would not want to do. If it is determined not to be in the public interest to continue with the prosecution and the victim does not wish to proceed with the prosecution, then the Crown Prosecutor may decide to terminate the proceedings. Regardless of what happens, we make sure that a victim services unit is engaged so they can help the victim through that process and ensure that their safety needs are met.
I believe that people who have been sexually assaulted choose to report to police for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they want to hold the offender accountable. They want a feeling of justice. They want to think that perhaps then it won't happen to someone else. They may require that as part of their healing process. And they may realize that it is a terrible thing to have happen and they don't want to see it happen to anybody.
The percentage of sexual assaults actually reported to police is very low. In Canada and many other countries, less than 1 victim out of 10 contacts police to report the crime. The reasons for this have a lot to do with myths our society believes about sexual assault. These myths are common in many cultures and often serve to blame the victim for what has happened. These misconceptions include beliefs and comments like the way a woman is dressed, how she looks, or her behavior. When men are sexually assaulted, their masculinity or sexual orientation may be questioned. All of these attitudes are wrong. One of the most important things you need to know is that sexual assault is never the fault of the victim. You are someone who has experienced a sexual assault. It doesn't matter how you were dressed, what you were doing, or where you were. What happened was not your fault. When someone reports a sexual assault or other type of crime to the police, an investigation takes place and a legal process begins. It can be complex and time-consuming for everyone involved, but there are many resources available to help you through the process. The information in this section will help you understand the roles of the participants in the legal proceedings. As the victim of a sexual assault, you'll learn about what to expect when the case goes to court. One of the first things you'll learn is that you will be described using many different words. Words like victim, complainant, and survivor. It doesn't change what has happened to you. This video does not attempt to give you specific legal advice. Instead, it will help you understand the choices that you could make. If you have questions after watching this section, you should contact your local victim services unit, sexual assault service, or Crown Prosecutor for more information.
The role of the Crown is to ensure the proper administration of justice and to prosecute people that have been charged with criminal offences. We are the lawyer for the province of Alberta, not for the police, the victim, or any other agency. Still, the victim is important to the Crown Prosecutor, and whether they want to proceed or not is something that we take very seriously. As well, we work closely with the police to ensure that the victim's needs and safety concerns are addressed and that they understand what is going on in the court process.
The role of defense counsel on sexual assault, or indeed on any other case, is first to explain to the accused what the process is, to identify what the essential components or elements of the offense are, to secure disclosure from the prosecution, that's all relevant information in the possession of the prosecution, to identify potential defense witnesses, and then to summarize, basically to look at the legal landscape, explain the situation to the accused, possibly negotiate with the prosecution in appropriate cases, otherwise proceed to trial.
The role of a judge is critical to the trial process. Many people say that a judge is like an umpire. Judges, like umpires, don't make the rules, they apply the rules. They ensure everyone plays by the rules. Judges manage the trial. and control the procedure to ensure that the trial runs smoothly and is fair to both sides.
The Crown Prosecutor decides which witnesses it's going to call at trial, and normally a victim will have to testify at trial or at the preliminary inquiry. The process this occurs is by a subpoena, and normally a police officer or an agent of the police will serve the victim with a subpoena. Please check the date on your subpoena carefully, as well as the time and place, and if it's not a date that you're able to attend court, let the Crown Prosecutor know as soon as possible, and they can try and make arrangements to change that date. There is the very rare circumstance where a victim may not have to testify, and there could be ways to get their evidence in, whether it be by videotape statement or evidence from a prior proceeding. But that would be quite rare and would very much depend on the circumstances of the case. In most cases, the victim will be called to testify.
In most situations, the accused must attend his or her trial. The accused shall treat all the participants, including the complainant, with respect and dignity. The accused and his or her lawyer will not be allowed to bully any of the witnesses, including the complainant, or to intimidate them.
Victim services can provide the victim with information about hearings and trial dates, times, places. We can also assist the victim with court orientation, court preparation, assist in attending court with the victim, and going through what role people play in the courts.
As a witness, your main role is to tell the truth about what happened to you. And so the best thing you can do is try and remain calm and listen very carefully to the questions that are asked. If you don't understand a question, please ask for it to be rephrased. And if the question needs more explanation than just yes or no, don't feel limited. You can give that explanation. As well, if you need a break or any other reason you need to stop, please let the judge know and they will decide where to go from there.
Before the trial happens, the police and Crown will meet with the victim. We will give them their statement to review, because oftentimes some time has lapsed, and so to refresh their memory, they can read over their statement and get an idea of the types of questions they're going to be asked in court.
The victim services units operate out of police divisions as well as RCMP detachments throughout Alberta. They are staffed by trained coordinators as well as victim advocate volunteers, and they provide crisis intervention, support, referral, and information to victims. We also have a program called Can Talk that can provide a confidential interpretation service to the victim as well.
The Crown Prosecutor will ask for a publication ban in any sexual assault case. This means that the media cannot report any identifying details of a complainant, including their name or where they work or any other things that would tend to identify them. This is a mandatory publication ban that the judge must grant if the prosecutor applies for it. And generally, in every case, a prosecutor would seek this type of ban. And that ensures that the victim's identity is safe and will not be in newspapers or on the radio, anything of that nature. Disclosure is simply a copy of the Crown file. The information that is personal to victims and witnesses will be taken out of that file before it is given to the accused or his lawyer. And personal information would include addresses, birth dates, anything of that nature. So they would not have access to personal information other than the person's name. Generally, defense counsel cannot ask a victim about prior sexual history or reputation. If defense counsel wants to ask those type of questions, they have to bring a special application to the court before they can ask those questions. They also cannot call the victim as a witness at that hearing. The standard is very high, and generally it would be quite difficult for defense to ask a victim questions about sexual history. Sometimes the complainant may get counseling or medical treatment prior to a matter going for trial. And so, for example, there may be medical records, psychological records, or a diary even that the complainant has kept that has not been disclosed to defense counsel. If defense counsel becomes aware of those documents, they have to make a special application before they can even see them. And again, the burden for them to prove that these are relevant to an issue at trial is quite high. It's one other way that we can protect the complainant's privacy interest in their personal documents.
The judge, after listening to all of the witnesses and considering any of the other evidence in the case, will then assess the reliability or credibility of that evidence. The trial judge will make findings of fact, will give reasons for their decision, and will explain how the law applies to those facts. If an accused is found guilty or pleads guilty to a crime, the role of the judge is then to conduct a sentencing hearing and impose a fit and proper sentence considering the circumstances of the offense and of the offender.
As a victim, you have a huge role to play in a sentencing hearing. One of the rights as a victim is to do a victim impact statement. You do not have to wait until there is a conviction before you do this. You can do it at any time in the proceedings. It is sent to the courthouse and left in a sealed envelope, and once someone is convicted, it is then opened. One of the ways that we can deal with the victim impact statement is to have you read it into the court yourself, have the Crown Prosecutor read it, or the judge can read it to themselves silently. I very much encourage victims to read it themselves. I think it's an important part of the process, and it's a chance for them to tell the court how this crime has affected them, and it may be their only chance to face the accused in a safe environment. So I very much encourage victims to read their victim impact statements themselves. But certainly if they're fearful, I'm happy to do it for them, or the judge can do it silently to themselves. The sentencing hearing is something that the victim should attend and should be advised of and take part in.
The lawyers, witnesses, public, and the accused should listen carefully to the judge's reasons to determine or understand why the charges were not proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The trial judge has to consider all of the evidence in the trial and assess the credibility and reliability of that evidence. Sometimes evidence is excluded, and that is a part of the judge's role and the decision-making process. The trial is not a simple credibility contest.
If there's not a conviction, it means that the Crown has not proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt. It means that there was not enough evidence to convince the judge of the guilt of the accused. There could be many reasons for this to happen, many of which have nothing to do with whether the complainant was believed or not, or the complainant's testimony. Make sure you talk with the Crown after the case to find out the reasons that the judge gave, especially if you're having trouble understanding them.
It is important that you know you do not have to go through the criminal justice system alone, and that you know what your rights are within the system as a victim of a crime. Specialized sexual assault services and victim services units are in a large number of communities across the province. They are there to help you.
After you report the crime to the police officer will refer you to the Victim Services Unit. If you have not been contacted by the Victim Services Unit, you may ask the investigating officer to refer you to the unit.
Victims of sexual assault need to know that Victim Services are here to provide support, that emotional support, information in regards to their case and their rights, and referrals to professional services. They also need to hear from Victim Services that this crime is not their fault. This sexual assault is not their fault. They have done nothing wrong.
Victim Services can help you by explaining what to expect if you need to go to the hospital for an examination or a sexual assault kit. We can help you with explaining the police procedures involved in the investigation.
Victim Services will contact a victim of sexual assault as often as the victim feels they need our support and services, and we will follow up with them throughout the whole criminal justice process. If a victim requires professional ongoing counseling that is not within our mandate, we will refer the victim to those support services.
Victim Services can provide the victim with information about hearings and trial dates, times, places. We can also assist the victim with court orientation, court preparation, assist in attending court with the victim, and going through what role people play in the courts.
Victim Services staff and volunteers operate within the Victims of Crime Act and the Victims of Crime Protocol. A victim of a sexual assault will be treated with compassion, courtesy, and respect. Their safety and security is very important.
The Victim Services Unit can provide you with a Victim of Crime Protocol book, which can explain to you the criminal justice system.
I want victims of sexual assault to know that Victim Services is here. We will provide you with the support that you need, we will give you the information that you need, and we will be sure that you get the resources to help you through this process.
For more information about Victim Services, contact your local Victim Services unit. A list of both police-based and community-based Victim Services units is available at victims.alberta.ca. The crime of sexual assault impacts you, your family, and friends in many different ways. It can be extremely helpful for you and members of your family to deal with its effects through counseling. Sexual assault counselors who specialize in this area are able to help you through a variety of services, agencies, and programs. Here is some information that may help you along the road to healing.
My role as a counselor or a therapist working with sexual assault victims is initially to provide support. We also help them with accessing resources, addressing coping, safety, self-care, those kind of issues. More long-term, we will provide long-term therapy in terms of trauma processing, just really helping them make sense of what they've experienced, putting it into perspective so they can move on with their life. Most often, Victim Services will provide court support as well, court prep. However, in some communities, there's not always the resources available. In those cases, we will provide those for the clients, or we will work alongside Victim Services to make sure that the clients get their needs met. Some of the normal feelings that a person will experience after an assault is guilt, shame, remorse. A lot of times people are really fearful of being judged by others. A lot of times people are very fearful about what other people in their life are going to think about them, that people are going to see them differently. So they have to deal with a number of different kinds of emotions that are coming up for them as a result of being assaulted. Another thing that comes into play with how it might affect an individual is your gender, your culture, or your religious background and beliefs. Every person has a different set of belief systems, and depending on where you are and what you come to the table with, it's going to affect you differently. Often men are very, very fearful of admitting that anything may have happened to them for fear of being judged by others, and that goes without saying, depending on your religious beliefs as well, or potentially your cultural background. Other things that we suggest for people to do is to really take care of themselves. Part of taking care of yourself is making sure that you are kind of plugged into people, support people. It's human nature to want to withdraw in times of crisis, and it's really important that that's the times when you really need to be looking to people to be supports for you through this process. Another area that we really suggest taking care of yourself is making sure that your safety needs are met, and really just doing the things that you would normally do to take care of yourself to regain that sense of normalcy. Through all of that, we also advise people to not use alcohol or drugs, because that will only increase negative feelings and thoughts that you are already going to be experiencing. So the reality is that people can't just forget about being assaulted. And although we might want to forget about it, the reality is it's going to be there for us. And so a person really needs to work at processing it and working through that trauma. Because like other traumas, if left unchecked, unaddressed, can manifest in many, many different ways in our lives. So that can be depression, other forms of mental illness, and it can really impact our relationships, the way we see ourselves and the way we see the world around us. So yes, it is possible to heal from sexual assault and trauma. It's a matter of putting things into perspective and understanding how the trauma has affected your life, your perception of yourself, as well as the world around you. specifically some areas that are kind of attended to through counseling will be repairing damaged trust, looking at isolation. Often people feel very isolated in their experience, thinking that they're the only person that this has happened to. So that's a very notable area that needs to be addressed. And lastly, really just making sense of what they've gone through, and being able to put the responsibility where it needs to be. So understanding how much control they had in the situation, and being able to be realistic with how much responsibility that they're owning through that process, and being able to put that back on the offender. Very important in the healing process. Some people find it healing to be able to report the crime as well as go through the court process and be able to stand up and say that this has happened and this is not right. For some people it's very difficult though to be able to face their offender in that setting, and sometimes it can be really disappointing when you don't get the outcome that you want. Family and friends have to really remember to not judge the individual, to just be there to support them, to not push them into reporting or making a statement, and to just be that person, that safe place where they can go to process their thoughts and their feelings. And through that, not asking them any details about the assault itself. And a lot of times after experiencing that, family and friends will have questions of their own and concerns, and so we really suggest that they go and get counseling or support for themselves or education on the subject, just to help themselves through that as well. It's really important that survivors of sexual assault know that no one deserves to be hurt, no one deserves to be assaulted, and that healing is possible.
In this section, you will meet two women who were sexually assaulted and who chose to report the crime to police. We hope that watching the very personal perspectives of these courageous women will help you understand more about what it may be like to report the sexual assault that happened to you, and to realize that you are not alone. The sexual assaults these women experienced, the impact it had on their lives, and their decisions to report are unique to them. It is extremely important that you make the decision that is right for you, for your health, and your own safety. During an assault, there are many things that a victim will do emotionally, mentally, and physically to cope with what is happening to them. Things like saying no, pleading, bargaining, fighting back, staying silent, and mentally leaving the situation by thinking about other people, places, or experiences. Regardless of what you may have done, you must remember that you are not responsible for this assault. Brenda, the first woman you will meet, was assaulted by a man she had met through work several years earlier. They had dated casually for a short period of time. Brenda was assaulted many years after they were no longer dating. She begins her story by talking about how she survived the assault.
He only had me for between 5 and 6 hours in this bathroom that he had set up. So, and then finally, there were some assaults that happened throughout the time frame, and I kept trying to convince him to let me go, and he wouldn't. You do what you can. It's the human body's and mind's really amazing when you're in survival mode. It's not like you see on TV where you're screaming and terrified. Like I was terrified, but I was very calm at the same time. I think my brain took over, and it was more thinking of a way to escape. I decided to report it to police. First of all, I think for safety reasons. I mean, I'm in some stranger's house in the middle of the night, and I needed to make the perpetrator accountable. He needed to pay for his crime. My expectations of police, well, on the 911 call, I think I was just begging for help at first, and I knew that once the police got there, that I knew I wasn't going to feel safe until the police arrived. Like, it felt like forever. Like, I'm like, are they coming? Are they coming? Are they coming? Like, I needed them to be there. The not knowing what to expect, it's a scary process. It absolutely is. It's knowing that I'm going to have to go through the entire night and give every detail, like intimate detail, to somebody, and then to think that you're going to have to potentially tell a judge and a room full of people that, you know, something that's horrific. I think that was the hardest part, is just knowing I had to share that and talk about it. And, you know, it's like reliving the worst night of your life. Right after the assault, I was taken to the hospital, and they did do an exam, and they did a sexual assault kit. And that was, it was quite difficult to go through that, mainly because it's probably the most intrusive exam you can possibly imagine. The nurses are very respectable and stuff, but they're taking measurements of every single inch of your body where there's any kind of bruising or any kind of mark. And then, of course, you know, taking swabs from various areas and stuff. I think I found the most surprising thing was the combing of the pubic hair. That was kind of strange for me, yeah, and hard. I'm sure if I wanted her to stop, that I could have, you know, requested that, and I don't think it would have been a problem, but I was looking at it that they need this information in order, like, the more information that they can get at this point, the stronger the case is going to be. It was really important for me that I knew that I had decided that this was going to go as far as it needed to go to make sure that this perpetrator paid, and I just instinctively knew that this is part of the process, so I just accepted that's what's got to happen. So what helped me through the process was the detectives that were on the case were great. The Crown's office was amazing. I could tell that they really were genuine and that they really cared. My friends and family were awesome, and the counseling that I received was really good as well. I had counseling support throughout the whole process, through right after it happened, through the trials, through all that. I also had support from Victim Services, which is through the police department, which I thought, you know, you don't learn about these divisions that are even there until you're a victim. But they were really good in preparing me for court to let me know what to expect. So I found that quite valuable as well. And then, yeah, just being in contact with the Crown and being kept in the loop, knowing, you know, what's the next step, what's going to happen, because I think it's the not knowing a lot of times that it's very stressful, like. And when you're kept in the loop, I think it makes it a lot easier. Some of the ways that I've been able to cope with sexual assault have been definitely having a good support system around me, my friends and my family, having someone to talk to, someone to listen when I need to talk. Absolutely having counseling has been really good. And probably the only unfortunate thing is that I've tended to use alcohol a little more than I did before, because I was having a lot of difficulty sleeping, and it became a coping mechanism. Some of the things I found most difficult about the process were the not knowing what was going to happen next. You know, the constant change of dates and delays in the trial. Every 90 days I'd have to wait for the outcome of a bail hearing, because he'd apply for bail every 90 days. So I'd be sitting by the phone waiting and wondering whether I needed to flee. You know, I'd have a bag packed and I was ready to go, because I truly felt that if he got out that I would be in danger. I felt like he had more rights than I did as far as a victim versus perpetrator. Like, it seemed to be like he was leading the process. Like, every time there was a delay, it was his fault, you know, and it was quite frustrating. I guess some of the lasting effects that I've found that have happened with me are, in constant fear of my safety. Like wherever I go, I'm very conscious of who's around me, and you know, I'm careful where I park. I try not to be out alone at night. I'm definitely fearful of just, you know, yeah, basically being somewhere by myself. I question my own judgment. I just, you know, like, this was somebody I thought I knew that did this to me, so it's made me question my ability to judge people. I've sometimes doubt myself in that way, but as far as the assault itself, I've never blamed myself. I know that it wasn't my fault. I think that's an important factor that victims need to realize. It's not their fault. I would report again, absolutely, because it's important that we as victims make these perpetrators accountable for their actions. It's the only way that we're going to put an end to it is by coming forward.
The next woman you'll meet is Cecilia. She'll tell you what happened to her, her choice to report it, and the support she received along the way. The man involved was someone who she had considered a friend, someone who'd offered to help her at a time when she needed it.
Okay, the circumstances around the person who assaulted me, he was a co-worker, and he offered me a place to stay because I wasn't well at the time, and so he told me that it was a place to stay. And then it was a very rural location, so I didn't have access to leaving. And then I didn't realize that it was like an assault until the second time it happened, which was probably a period of like 3 weeks. Well, I ended up calling the RCMP and from the nearby town, and they came out, and I met them down the road because I was fearful for myself, and they took me to the nearest local detachment. Okay, the most difficult part of reporting was retelling the story and remembering the dates and exactly what happened and in what order. That's when I became fearful, more fearful. I found it very difficult to relive telling the story. What made it easier to report to the police was the compassion and understanding, and that the training that they had to deal with this crime. And I was in a very isolated place, so the police were the only service that I had because I didn't have any friends or family anywhere in the vicinity. The police helped me by taking me to a shelter where I could get the help that I needed. I was afraid because the police couldn't arrest this man at the time because he was out of the jurisdiction, and it took about a month until he came back so that they could interview him, in which time that they did arrest him, and then I felt safe. It was a difficult period knowing that he hadn't been charged, and I felt very afraid. The things that had helped me were that I went to the shelter, I also went to the sexual assault center, and I used mental health services. You can use the information if you want to get better and get over this and get on with your life. Otherwise, you'll end up holding on to this and you never move forward in life. Mm-hmm. And so I just used every service that was available to me because I didn't want to be the victim. The Sexual Assault Center was an advocate for me in areas where I wasn't seeming to be getting help, and they helped me go over all the things that I needed to do. Well, the thing that I would like to tell victims of sexual assault is that there is help out there. Make a report to the police and ask for all the different services that there are available. And ones that you can't find, just continue to ask because they are out there. If I had to do it all over again, I definitely would report this because it was a crime.
In Cecilia's situation, the man accused of the crime was not convicted. Even so, Cecilia believes she did the right thing by reporting her experience to police. It may be important for some victims to see that the person who sexually assaulted them is held accountable for their actions, especially in a court of law, and this can help people with the healing process. However, as many of the people you've met in this video have pointed out, charges are not always laid and convictions do not always occur. It's important for you to consider all of these possibilities as you decide what is best for you. Finally, it's important that you remember what has happened to you was not your fault. It was not your choice. The person that commits sexual assault chooses to hurt others. The only person responsible for whether he or she continues to assault others is that person. You are the victim of a sexual assault. You need to make a well-informed decision about whether you should report this. We hope that watching this video will help in reaching the decision that is right for you personally. Only you know the right thing to do for you. Remember that you can ask for information and support that will help you decide what to do next and to help you begin the vital process of healing.